Hey guys, probably going to put this video on our how to do stuff in Japan playlist because it's probably something that's best to be aware of if you're intending to come to spend some time in Japan to live or work. So some of you might have seen a video we made a couple of months ago talking about the new government or the current Japanese government and their new immigration policies, about how they are making it, updating their immigration laws to make them harder for people to visit and live in Japan or stay in Japan. Since then, there's been a number of sort of meetings or protests from both sides. So sometimes meetings and protests by people wanting the immigration laws to be tougher, and we don't want foreigners in Japan, that group. And then there's another group of protesters who have been protesting against the new policies and saying that Japanese government should be more compassionate and more welcoming to foreigners. And interesting too, the people involved in that protest are often predominantly Japanese people with some foreign people there as well. So there are a percentage of Japanese people who are actually against all these new tougher immigration laws. So as mentioned in that previous video, really most of the laws have really just gone back to pretty much what it was 20 years ago. It used to be similar 20 years ago. You really had to prove that you gave some value to Japan by coming here, or you couldn't get a visa. And then slowly over the last 20 years it sort of got easier, and then now this government's turning it back and saying no, it's too easy, we need to make it harder. So they've changed a lot of the laws to make it harder. So that's all, you know, most people would agree that every country has a right to decide on its immigration laws and who it lets in and who it doesn't. Most people would agree with that. However, what happened was, at one of these protests against how unfair the new laws are, there was a guy got up and spoke, an Indian man got up and spoke. And his story was that he's been in Japan for 30 years. And for the last 18 years, he's operated his own Indian restaurant. And he's come time to renew his business manager visa, which is what, if you operate a business in Japan, that's one of the visas that you can use to do that. And when he came time to upgrade, to renew his business manager visa, the new requirement is that you have to have 3 million yen in capital, in cash basically, and that's a new requirement. And he doesn't have 3 million yen in cash. Now, the rest of his story is he's operated this Indian restaurant, but he's also got two kids that were born in Japan. So that both his kids were born in Japan and have lived in Japan all their lives, and they can only speak Japanese, right? So now we've got a guy who's a married man who's got 2 kids and a small business. Now I think a lot of you guys that have operated small businesses and have kids would understand that a lot of people in that situation don't have a spare 3 million yen. It's about $20,000 US. So, you know, any of you guys watching, a lot of you guys watching who have kids, including myself, don't have a spare $20,000, right? And so because he doesn't have a spare $20,000, they wouldn't let him renew his business visa, which means he's got to leave, which means his 2 kids that were born in Japan and have grown up in Japan and only speak Japanese and only know about life in Japan, and he and his wife have to leave, basically, which is, I think some people would agree, it's a bit unfair. Obviously that 3 million yen requirement is quite reasonable. Again, anybody who's operated a business would know having a spare $20,000 when you start a business, $20,000 would be a minimum, you'd think. So for a person coming to Japan to start a business, being required to have $20,000, quite a reasonable request, right? To make sure that they can pay their bills and pay their taxes and do all the things that they've got to do. You don't want them coming here to start a business with no money. However, this man has been here for 30 years, paying his bills and paying his taxes and obeying the law, and he spent the last 18 years operating his business and paying his taxes and and obeying the law. We know that because if he hadn't been, they wouldn't have been allowing him to renew his business visa every time it came up. So he's already proved himself. He's already proved himself. The fact that he doesn't have the 20 grand is sort of irrelevant because he's already proved himself. He's already showed that he can pay his bills and pay his taxes and do the right thing. So you would hope that, often when governments make new laws in different, whatever country, often what they'll do is so that you don't get this sort of unfair situation, because obviously he's come to Japan and he's fulfilled all the requirements for the visa, and then every time he's renewed his visa, he's fulfilled all the requirements of the visa, and the only reason he's not now is because they've changed the rules. So basically he's been following the rules consistently and doing the right thing consistently, and then suddenly now they've changed the rules, they moved the goalpost, and all suddenly now he can't do it, which seems very unreasonable. Usually, if they do in a lot of countries, when governments change laws, they have I think they call it a grandfather policy, don't they? That if you've already been operating under a previous law and doing the right thing, that the new law gives you an exemption. They put that as part of the new law, grandfather clause. People. So, for example, in this case, people who've been living in Japan for more than 10 years and fulfilling their obligations and haven't broken the rules and they've paid their taxes and done all the right things are exempt from this new requirement. It'd be that simple. It'd be that simple that people that have done the right thing, paid their taxes, obeyed all the rules, are exempt from the new requirements. Would be quite a reasonable thing to do, because this is the guy we've heard about, because he got up at one of those protests, one of those meetings, and told his story. But you can imagine, for every, we've heard about him, but how many other people have been in exactly the same situation, where they've been living here as good residents, and they've been paying their taxes and paying their bills and building a life, raising children who also are building their lives. It's even worse on the kids. He's been here 30 years. He's spent more time in Japan than he spent in India. So it's pretty tough on him. But for his kids, they've spent their whole lives here. And I can totally relate to that, because that's the same situation as my kids. They were born here and they've lived their whole lives here. One of my kids has never been outside Japan. The other one visited Australia for a couple of weeks. But one of my kids has never been outside Japan, and his kids have been in a similar sort of situation where they were born here, raised here, and their whole life is living here, and suddenly they're told they've got to go live somewhere else. So it just seems very unfair, very unreasonable, and heartless, really, really heartless, and that his story got a lot of widespread attention in the mainstream media, and you'd think that if the government had any heart, they'd go, okay, look, we need to address this and give exemptions to people who've been here a long time and done the right thing. I mean, he's 30 years old. He's been here for 30 years. So any Japanese person who's under 30 years old has lived in Japan less time than that man has, right? So it would seem fair and reasonable, but they're not going to. So what can we learn from this? Well, what we can learn from this is, if you come to Japan and put your life, your blood, sweat and tears into your life in Japan, be aware that they can shift the goalposts any time and that you could be made to leave. If you're not Japanese, if you don't have Japanese citizenship, we've just got to assume this could happen to any of us, that at any time they can change the rules, shift the goalposts, and you might just lose the life that you've built in Japan and be forced to go live somewhere else. So I think anybody that's already living here, it makes the people already living here, some of us, really nervous that this is what they can do to us. My wife and kids are safe because they're Japanese. They can't make them leave, but they could let me leave. I'm a permanent resident. If they suddenly change the requirements for permanent residents and don't give grandfather clauses, they could, who knows what they could demand? Japanese DNA, who knows? But, for those of us who live here, already, it makes some of us nervous. For those of you thinking about coming here in the future, be aware of this before you bring your life savings here and work hard, pay your taxes, and do all the right things, and put your life's blood, sweat, and tears into building life in Japan. Be aware that they could take it away from you at a moment's notice, and nothing you can do about it. There's no sort of, you don't see any sort of exemptions or compassion or anything like that. So, no doubt, there's always both sides of these sort of discussions. When we talk about immigration, you've got one end of the spectrum where people think that there should be no borders and people should be able to live anywhere they want in the world with no questions asked. The other end of this extreme is people who think that nobody should move anywhere. Everybody should live where they're born, and nobody should move anywhere else. Everybody should stay where they're born and not move anywhere else. And the rest of us sort of lie somewhere in between those two extremes. So no doubt we'll see comments underneath this video that will illustrate those extremes and everywhere in the middle. As long as we keep it reasonably civilized. Unfortunately, whenever we get these discussions about immigration, it does seem to sometimes cross the line over to bigotry and racism. YouTube's system has been fine-tuned over the years, and I've noticed that extreme racist or bigoted comments do tend to get grabbed by the YouTube system, and they get hidden from view automatically. It's not us, it's the YouTube system that does it. However, usually we see what they are, and we have the ability to approve comments. So now and again someone will leave a really racist or really abusive comment or something. The YouTube system holds it for review. If we read it and think it's okay, we can click, because sometimes they do unnecessarily remove comments that really aren't that bad. And if we see a comment that's just free speech, even if we totally disagree with it and it's totally opposite to what we believe, as long as it's sort of not too insulting, usually we just approve them so that people can see both sides of arguments. However, if something's really extreme, because sometimes it's just over the top, some of the racist, bigoted stuff that the system grabs is fair enough, that it really is too racist, too bigoted, too abusive, and in that case, if the YouTube system's removed it, we won't interfere. Oh man, I just realised the main camera's gone off. So anyway, I don't know when that disappeared, guys. Sometime in this video I've disappeared, haven't I? Anyway, so that's probably enough of that anyway. Just a heads up, basically. A heads up if you're in Japan already, make sure you've got a plan B. And if you're planning on coming here in the future, be aware that I suspect this sort of anti-immigration thing is going to get stronger. It seems to be getting stronger around the world, so it's probably not going to get any easier for us to be here in Japan. So if you're planning on coming here in the future, be aware the rug could get pulled out from under your feet at any moment with no warning and nothing you can do about it. So have a plan B is probably a good idea. Anyway, that's enough of that. More videos coming soon.